What if I told you the fridge is one of the biggest lies we ever believed, and for centuries people kept eggs fresh for months without electricity, without chemicals, without big agriculture? Don't scroll, because the first method alone could change how you look at food forever. In medieval villages, long before supermarkets, families faced brutal winters. No trucks, no cold storage, just survival. So they learned secrets. Secret number one, water glassing. Farmers mixed clean water with slaked lime and gently lowered fresh eggs inside clay jars. The lime sealed the pores of the shell. Air couldn't get in. Bacteria stayed out. Months later, in the dead of winter, they cracked them open. Still good. Still usable. Sounds simple, so why don't we hear about it today? Now here's the twist. Method 2 was even stranger. Coating eggs in animal fat or beeswax. Imagine dipping each egg in warm wax, sealing it like a time capsule. Oxygen blocked. Spoilage slowed. Hidden in straw baskets, these eggs lasted far longer than you'd expect. But wait. What if I told you some families buried their eggs? That's method 3. They packed eggs in cool earth cellars, layered in dry sand, ash, or oat chaff. The ash absorbed moisture. The sand stabilized temperature. Nature became the refrigerator. No power bill, no plastic cartons. And here's the question. If this worked for hundreds of years, why did we stop? Method 4 might shock you. Pickling eggs in vinegar brine. Not just for taste, for survival. The acid killed harmful bacteria and preserved the inside. Sailors and travelers relied on them. Crack open a jar weeks later, and there it was, protein ready to eat. No hen required that day. But medieval people didn't just preserve eggs cooked. They preserved them raw in salt. Heavy salting drew moisture out and created an environment where microbes couldn't survive. Salty eggs lasted astonishingly long. And here's where it gets interesting. Some households rotated eggs daily, never washing off the natural bloom, the protective coating laid by the hen. That invisible layer is nature's shield. Modern factories wash it away, forcing refrigeration. Medieval families simply left it intact. Suddenly, eggs could sit at room temperature safely for weeks. Think about that. The modern system might actually be the fragile one. Now here comes method 6, the lime plaster vaults. In some regions, eggs were stored in cool stone chambers, lined with lime-washed walls. Lime naturally resists bacteria and mold. The environment itself became preservation technology. No branding, no patents. Just knowledge passed quietly from mother to daughter. And then there's method 7, the one almost nobody talks about. Fermented egg preservation. In parts of Europe and Asia, eggs were aged intentionally in controlled alkaline or mineral solutions, transforming texture and flavor while making them last dramatically longer. The taste changed, yes, but in times of scarcity, nutrition mattered more than comfort. These weren't desperate tricks, they were calculated systems, tested by harsh winters, proven by survival. So ask yourself, if medieval peasants could keep eggs edible for months without electricity, what changed? Was it really about safety or about control, standardization, and industrial profit? Big agriculture depends on short supply chains and constant consumption. Refrigeration keeps you dependent. Expiration dates keep you buying. But once you realize eggs naturally protect themselves, once you understand bloom lime, ash wax, salt, suddenly the system doesn't feel so untouchable. And here's the powerful reveal. None of these methods were truly banned. They were forgotten, replaced, labeled unsafe without context. Yet food historians and homesteaders today are quietly reviving them and finding they still work when done properly. The past wasn't primitive, it was practical. Medieval people weren't ignorant. They were resourceful. They understood something we're only beginning to relearn. that preservation is about environment, balance, and patience, not just technology. So, next time you open your fridge, ask yourself, are you using modern convenience or are you trapped by it? Because the real secret isn't how they preserved eggs, it's how much knowledge we allow to disappear. You think the secrets ended there? No. Because what I'm about to tell you makes the first 7 methods look simple. Imagine living in a world where one cracked egg could mean hunger for your family, and yet people still manage to stretch a single laying season across an entire year. How? Not with machines, with strategy. Let's start with something almost nobody talks about: egg timing. Medieval households didn't just collect eggs randomly. They knew that spring eggs, when hens were healthiest and diets were rich in greens, had stronger shells and thicker blooms. Those were the eggs chosen for long storage. Weak shells, eat them immediately. Strong shells, save them for winter. Selection was survival. Now ask yourself, when was the last time you even looked at an eggshell closely? Here's where it gets even more interesting. Some families stored eggs pointed end down. Sounds small, right? It wasn't. Inside every egg is an air cell. By keeping the pointed end down, the air pockets stayed at the top and stable, reducing spoilage and keeping the yolk centered longer. A tiny detail, massive difference. They understood structure without microscopes. But what if an egg started floating in water? Medieval women used the float test long before science explained it. Fresh eggs sink. Older eggs rise as air builds inside. It wasn't superstition. It was observation passed through generations. No expiration dates printed in ink, just physics in a wooden bowl. And then there was rotation. In some households, stored eggs were gently turned every few days. Why? To prevent the yolk from settling and sticking to the shell membrane. Think about that level of care. Preservation wasn't passive, it was active. It was active, it required attention. Now here's a twist you didn't expect. Smoke. In certain colder regions, eggs were stored in kitchens where hearth fires burned daily. The constant low-level smoke created a dry, antimicrobial atmosphere. Over time, smoke compounds subtly coated surfaces, helping reduce mold and insects. The kitchen itself became part of the preservation system. Nothing wasted. Everything connected. But let's go deeper. Some monasteries kept detailed food records. Monks tracked laying cycles, storage conditions, and consumption rates. They weren't just praying, they were managing supply chains, centuries before corporations existed. Organization was their refrigeration. Knowledge was their insurance policy. And here's something even more powerful: community sharing. If one household had surplus and another had none, eggs were traded or preserved collectively. Large lime pits stored hundreds at once. Preservation scaled without factories. It was decentralized, local, resilient. Now pause for a second. If power grids fail today, how long would supermarket shelves last? 3 days? Maybe less. Medieval systems were slow, but they were shockproof. That's the difference. Speed versus resilience. But there's another layer nobody mentions: taste. Eggs preserved in lime water tasted almost identical when cooked properly. Eggs stored in ash developed subtle mineral notes. Pickled eggs absorbed herbs and spices. Preservation wasn't just about avoiding rot. It created variety. It turned survival into culture. Recipes evolved around stored eggs. Custards in winter. Breads enriched months after laying season ended. Food wasn't bland hardship. It was adapted creativity. Now here's the uncomfortable question. Why were these methods gradually abandoned? Part of it was urbanization. As people moved to cities, they lost cellars, space, and time. Industrial farms centralized production. Eggs were washed for uniform appearance. Removing the bloom, refrigeration became mandatory. Regulations favored large processors who could meet standardized washing and cooling requirements. Small methods didn't disappear overnight. They became inconvenient in a system built for scale. And once a generation grows up without seeing lime jars or ash bins, the knowledge fades. Not banned by law in most places, just buried under convenience. But here's the final reveal you weren't expecting. Modern homesteaders and food researchers have quietly tested these medieval methods again. Water glassing works when eggs are clean and unwashed. Ash storage, effective in dry conditions. Wax coating, surprisingly reliable. The science now explains what villagers understood instinctively. Control oxygen, control moisture, protect the bloom, and you control spoilage. It's microbiology, just without lab coats. So the real story isn't that medieval people had strange tricks. It's that they mastered principles we outsource to machines. Temperature stability, airflow, moisture balance, careful handling. These aren't outdated ideas. They're foundational, and maybe that's why this matters more than ever. Because when you rely entirely on complex systems, you lose flexibility. But when you understand the basics, when you know why something works, you gain options. Medieval egg preservation wasn't magic. It was observation plus patience. And patience is something modern food systems rarely allow. So here's my challenge to you. Next time you hold an egg, don't just see breakfast. See engineering. See centuries of quiet experimentation. See families who refuse to let winter win. Because the biggest secret isn't hidden in a lime jar or a cellar floor. It's this: resilience doesn't require advanced technology. It requires knowledge you're willing to keep alive. And once you learn it, you can't unsee it. Before you decide this is just nostalgia, stop. Because Part 3 changes everything. Imagine a harsh winter in the 14th century. Snow outside, no hens laying, no caravans arriving. And yet, inside that small wooden house, eggs are still being cracked into a bowl. Not luck, not magic, system. And here's what most people miss. Medieval egg preservation wasn't only about storage methods. It was about mindset. They thought months ahead, seasons ahead, even years ahead. While we think in shopping trips, they thought in survival cycles. Let that sink in. Now here's something almost unbelievable. Many households planned egg preservation around the moon and temperature shifts. Not superstition, but observation. They noticed cooler, stable days reduced spoilage during processing. They worked with nature's rhythm instead of fighting it. Today, we rely on constant climate control. Back then, timing was the technology. And here's the twist. Failure was expected. Not every egg survived. Some cracked, some spoiled. But because they preserved in batches using different methods, lime, ash, salt, wax, they reduced total risk. It was diversification centuries before financial markets used the word. If one method failed, another succeeded. Compare that to now. One power outage can wipe out entire refrigerated warehouses. So who was really more secure? But let's go deeper. Medieval cooks understood something about eggs most people today never conned. Cider, structure, equals longevity. A hen fed naturally. Free-ranging produced thicker shells and stronger membranes. Diet influenced durability. That meant preservation started long before the egg was laid. Care for the animal determined winter survival. It was a chain reaction. Soil health, feed quality, shell strength, storage success. Today, production is separated from preservation. Back then, it was one continuous loop. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Industrial systems thrive on predictability and uniform turnover. Medieval systems thrived on adaptability. They adjusted to weather changes. They changed storage spots if humidity rose. They checked jars weekly. Preservation was interactive. Modern consumers rarely interact with food beyond opening a carton. Knowledge shrinks when involvement shrinks. Now imagine this: a mother teaching her daughter how to gently lower eggs into lime water, explaining why the bloom must remain untouched. That lesson wasn't written in books. It lived in hands-on practice. When industrialization accelerated in the 19th and 20th centuries, those kitchens disappeared. Apartments replaced farmhouses, cellars vanished. Regulations required washing for commercial sale. And slowly, memory faded. Not because it was dangerous, because it was inconvenient in crowded cities. But here's the part nobody talks about. Food security experts today are quietly studying traditional preservation again. Why? Because resilient systems matter in uncertain times. Climate disruptions, supply chain breakdowns, energy instability. Suddenly, low-tech storage doesn't look primitive. It looks smart. And here's a powerful detail. Properly water-glassed eggs have been tested months later and still perform in baking almost identically to fresh eggs. The yolk slightly flatter, the whites slightly thinner, but functional, oozable, reliable. That's not myth. That's chemistry. Control oxygen and microbes, and the egg remains stable. So why does this story feel controversial? Because it challenges the idea that progress only moves forward. Sometimes progress forgets useful things. Sometimes convenience replaces competence. Medieval people didn't have refrigerators, but they had awareness. They monitored smell, sound, texture. Crack an egg into a separate bowl before mixing. Check for off odors. Observe carefully. Responsibilities stayed with the household, not a printed date stamp. And here's the emotional beat. When you preserve your own food, you value it differently. An egg stored for winter wasn't casual breakfast. It represented foresight, effort, planning. Maybe that's what we've really lost. Not methods, but relationship. Now picture a future scenario. Short-term power disruption. Empty shelves. Panic buying. Who feels calmer? The person who understands only refrigeration, or the one who knows multiple preservation principles? That's the payoff. Knowledge creates confidence, and confidence reduces fear. Medieval egg preservation wasn't rebellion. It wasn't conspiracy. It was necessity refined by experience. The modern world isn't wrong for using refrigeration. It's efficient and safe. But efficiency without redundancy is fragile. Medieval systems had built-in backups, different materials, different environments, different strategies layered together. That's resilience engineering before the term existed. So here's the final reveal of part 3. The real secret big agriculture can't erase isn't lime water or ash bins. It's self-reliance. When people understand food at a fundamental level, oxygen, moisture, temperature, they become less dependent on centralized systems, not disconnected, just empowered. And empowerment spreads quietly. You don't need to reject modern life to appreciate ancient skill. You just need to remember that. Knowledge compounds across generations. The past solved problems with the tools available. The question is, are we willing to learn from it? Because winter always comes in one form or another. And the families who prepared weren't lucky. They were informed. And once you see that, once you understand that an egg can carry months of security inside a fragile shell, you realize something powerful. Resilience has always been within reach.